1958, he may have, I believe he did, give Alan the impetus to go to graduate school in classics, and this somehow stemmed from common service in the Army, which perhaps Mort will explain to us. Thank you, Mort.
Dear friends, we came here because of an unhappy, unfortunate thing that happened a year or so ago, and yet with good reason has this gathering been called a celebration, because we have a lot to celebrate when we think of Alan's life and what he gave us over the years and what we got out of the relationship. I would like to remind you of how he and I met and became acquainted with one another. We were in a program run by the U.S. Army during the war in the Army Reserve, where young men were brought in at age 17 to study engineering. The idea being that after the war was over, skills like this would be needed. And so we joined this program individually and separately. I didn't know he was there until we did happen to meet. We were stationed at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor to learn engineering. Nothing could seem farther from my ability than to talk about engineering, but that's what I was made to do. And early in the program, we were being given a talk about how to maintain our equipment by a young man who was in the program. He was a brilliant student. He had been the #1 student in a class of, I think, 7,000 students at Lane Technical High School in Chicago. So he had some mental powers. And he was explaining to us how we should make our beds in the morning so that they would look good. And he said, and be sure as you work on your beds that the blanket covering it is kept taut. And at this misuse and butchering of the word taut, Alan and I looked at each other, caught one another's eyes, and later on we mentioned that this man had not used the right English. And yet this glance between us was our first meeting and communication of any kind, this little bit of a glance. And so we continued this relationship. We had both studied Latin, and a couple of days after this meeting I told you about, I heard him talking to his parents on the telephone, and he said, and I've met someone who can quote Virgil at length in Latin. And we had both studied Latin, as I said, and this awakened our interest in classical studies with one another. And over the years, we became classmates at Harvard. As Alan entered Harvard in graduate school, I think I was already there, and I suggested he should join us, which he did. And we both studied under Sterling Dow, who has been mentioned today. We were never exactly parallel in tempo because Alan had gone into business after he got his BA degree. He worked for an insurance company, and he told me that his duty was to be a claims adjuster. Now, some of you may know what this means. He explained it in this way: Alan, these kids need crutches. See that they don't get them. It will surprise you to know that when he applied to graduate school at Harvard, following my advice, I was already there were some people who did not care to have him admitted to graduate school. How could this be? Because he had gone into business and had spent 3 or 4 years in this profession that I just mentioned. And some people thought that he didn't have the dedication to scholarship that would justify his joining graduate school. There was, however, a professor at Harvard, maybe not terribly widely remembered today, Peter Elder. J.P. Elder was actually his name. He became dean of the Harvard Graduate School. And he told me that in discussing the admission of Alan with his colleagues, he said, I don't care what this man has done before, that is, we already discussed that, but I think he will be a good graduate student. And so he was admitted to Harvard on the recommendation of Peter Elder. And we know that this application was successful and that Alan became the outstanding study of the law courts and a number of other technical subjects within Greek history. His accomplishments in literature have already been discussed, and in every way, he was an outstanding man. Toward the end of his career, and I will skip over many years in the interest of time, we went to dinner at the APA convention. I think it was in Philadelphia, and Alan and I had the habit, Michigan dialect was what we spoke. We were both from Michigan. If you took someone to dinner, he would say, "Oh, you're the big butter and egg man, are you?" This was Michigan dialect because in Michigan, butter and eggs are big parts of the economy. So either Alan or I would assume the role of the butter and egg man and invite someone to dinner, be it just a drink or a glass of beer or whatever. That was not our last meeting, however, but it was at the APA. And it's an example of the memories that I cherish. And when we all know that sometimes during our life we need good memories, we have other not so good memories pressing in on us. And when I think of Alan and think of some of the great times we had playing tennis, playing squash, doing other things together, he told his friends at this meeting, this dinner that he gave as the big butter and egg man, he said how long we had known each other. And he concluded the story with these words, "And never a cross word." Thank you for listening to me.